Hello everybody and welcome to our presentation about international joint venture success. My name is Jorg Eising and my colleague Koen Knobbe will later on appear in the presentation. Today we're going to talk about which resources are the basis for an international joint venture success. We are going to answer this question by firstly looking at what is an international joint venture, so the definition of an IJV. Then we're going to look at choosing the right partner for an IJV, the right mix of resources, and lastly we're going to look at how to measure the IJV performance. When we're talking about an international joint venture, we first have to know what a joint venture is. This is a business arrangement in which two or more parties agree to pool their resources for the purpose of accomplishing a specific task. This task can, for instance, be a specific project that a firm wants to do with another firm. A main reason for a joint venture is that these two firms can pool their resources and therefore gain resources they didn't have on their own. The difference between a joint venture and an international joint venture is that the headquarters of at least one parent firm is located outside the country of operations of the joint venture. This basically means that it is a joint venture of two firms that are in different countries, so one is in a foreign country. A joint venture is always a separate legal organization entity. This means that they are separate from each other, they have their own businesses, and they do not merge. You can see this in the figure described beneath, which is the most common form of an international joint venture, which is a multinational enterprise who partners up with a local domestic company and they together form an international joint venture. The X in the figure describes that it is a separate legal organization entity and that they do not merge together. Then we're going to look at the partner selection. In the article of Hitt et al. Is stated that selection of an appropriate partner is a critical decision because different resources for different partners, because different firms have different resources that they would like to have. And in the article they specifically look at emerging markets and developed markets, because these two markets have a different context and they might have different preferences for a partner. The results of the article is that in emerging markets we see that they are mostly looking for resources that are basic and that because they didn't have an alliance before with another firm, and that they are looking for instance, financial assets or technical capabilities, intangible assets, and willingness to share expertise, because also their capability of adapting to a different firm is not very high yet. And the difference between the developed markets is that they have had experience with an alliance, and therefore they are looking for different kind of aspects of the firm, for instance unique competencies, market knowledge, and cost of alternatives. Then now Koen is going to continue with make or buy.
Hello everyone, my name is Koen and I will continue this presentation. So first I wanted to go into why actually these critical resources cannot just be bought on the market. So why do we need an international joint venture? Well, if you can be reminded by what we had in the previous lectures, a resource cannot be bought simply by a firm because it is actually embedded in a firm and you need supporting resources for this other resource to work. So if you buy something from a firm and it works there, it might work very differently in your firm. So how can you cancel this out? You can cancel this out by joining in a joint venture with this other firm, and then they can actually help you leverage this complementary resource in the joint venture. So what is the idea about resource complementarity actually? Because of course there are resources which are very important, but the idea that is actually represented in the literature of this week is that these resources can also complement each other. So in this figure you can see how local knowledge and technology resources have an influence on the performance of a joint venture. But here you can actually see that what they mean in the literature is that if there is a local knowledge in the joint venture, this influences how the technology resource of the firm influences the joint venture performance. So this also works the other way around. How much technical resources there are in the firm influences the impact that the local knowledge has on the JV performance. So the difference between the two articles of this week is actually that the first article was more talking about the selection process of a JV, and the second article is trying to measure the performance or the influence of the selection process on the performance of the joint venture. Because this is important because, as stated before, is that the failure rate of alliances is actually around 60 or 70%. So then you can question how effective a joint venture is. So what they do in the article of Choi and Beamish is they measure JV performance, but they do this by a self-reported measurement of the overall satisfaction from the general manager of the joint venture. This is the dependent variable. And they also measure the technology, resources, and the local knowledge of the joint venture by self-assessment of the manager. This already shows how difficult it can be to measure performance, because there is a lot of question marks you can put on this way of thinking. Because you can imagine that if you ask someone how well the joint venture is performing, and then your next question is to ask them about the resources they have, then if they say that they're performing very well, probably they would say that the resources are also very well compared to the competitor. So then there is a bias, probably. The authors do mention this, but they didn't really solve this, so this is something they state for future research. So, to finish, we think that the complementary resources are the basis for the joint venture performance. So there are actually two components that affect the success of an international joint venture. The first is that firms, of course, look for complementary resources, and they want to get this by joining into a joint venture. And then we see that a lot of firms join into a joint venture with firms from a different context, because as we have seen before, is that firms from a different context have different preferences in which resources they need, and therefore they go for different partners. And this ensures that the resources that they have in the joint venture actually complement each other. So that was our presentation.